there's an episode of Seinfeld where Elaine gets a wedding invitation in the mail, and instead of being happy, she's upset. She tells Jerry, "You are not going to believe what I got in the mail." And the reason she's upset is that the wedding is only 1 week away, but it's in India, and she just got the invitation. So she calls it an invitation. Invitation means I'm letting you know there's an event. You are technically invited. Here is your envelope with the word invitation on it. But it would be pretty hard for you to attend, so I don't expect to see you. I've been thinking a lot about how this applies to school because I think kids in school are getting invitations. For example, at our school, everyone's invited to join the robotics team, but robotics meets after school. So what about kids who ride the bus? Kids who ride the bus get invitations. Who's getting bussed in? Most of the Black kids in my school are bussed in. They do not live in the neighborhood. Students who do not live in the neighborhood got invitations.
Troublemakers, class clowns, the bad kids. These terms, it puts the onus on the student and not the many variables that contribute to the behavior. Students considered the bad kids have an internalized understanding of this label that has been reinforced by years of being ignored, moved to the front of the class to be watched, never chosen for awards, called when they clearly don't know the answer, and ultimately reminded daily that they are the quote-unquote problems in the class.
Yeah, so I had this one student who he was a great student, but he kind of internalized himself that he wasn't a good student in math because he knew that there was an accelerated honors class, and he had internalized in himself that because he wasn't in that honors class, that he wasn't good at doing math at all, and that was his identity for a while. And it took a lot of convincing for him to understand that he was just as capable, if not better, in terms of understanding math and finding individual strengths, and he kind of shied away from all the different ways of how he was good.
My student Zarina said, "I have felt that I have never belonged in science for 2 reasons. 1, there are not a lot of women in science. And 2, they don't take us seriously, especially women of color." I did not feel othered until I went to Loyola Marymount University. My high school was predominantly Latinos, so when I went to LMU, it was a huge culture shock. There were a lot of times when I was on that campus that I felt that I did not belong, especially in my field. And I quickly realized that a lot of my classmates were white males, and there were few women and even fewer women of color. Not being able to see people that look like me on campus made me feel like I did not belong. According to the National Center for Education, here are the figures for women of color with a degree in STEM. Asians, 5%, Blacks, 2.9%, and Latinas, 3.8%, which is extremely low, and this has to change.
One of the biggest challenges with this idea, especially when we have students who are emergent biliterate in our campus, is the idea of which programs they're going to end up getting tracked into as an English learner. And that's really a complicated situation because our students who are English learners and who are oftentimes, they start to become what we call as PLTELs, or pre-long-term English learners. They can get put into special classes and special programs in which their sole primary role is really to learn English and learn how to manipulate the English language until they become classified. And part of the challenge with these courses is that oftentimes they are no longer permitted to participate in other type of classes that they would want to, like different electives.
I'm here to talk about a group of students that are always uninvited, our special ed population. We welcome them to our schools, but we place them at the furthest corners of the campus, making them feel uninvited. We offer them inclusion, but our teachers are not prepared or trained to support them, making them feel uninvited. And we think that that's what's best for them, keeping them systematically and physically uninvited from their school community.
How can we listen to include and empower the people at our school?
Let's clarify what you mean by the people.
Stakeholders, parents, children, students, teachers, community, staff.
See, that's really difficult because I honestly believe that requires some kind of physical contact or physical proximity. It's really hard to build relationships when you see a person through Zoom for 3 minutes. So how are we going to build relationships with parents where we're stuck in this situation where we can't meet and socialize with students and parents how we normally do?
I wonder though, Frank, if it's about inviting, because do you remember in our first week of PLI, there's a principals panel that came and talked to us.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the principals was really surprised that she actually got more participation through Zoom than what she got in-house open house. And that really struck me because what she was saying was she had found a way to meet parents where they were for their schedule and for just the activities that they had. And I thought that's a really good first step. Like, learn how to invite in a way that meets people where they are.
It begs the question, why do we hold the meetings at a time when it's not as accessible to all of our parents, right? I think it's kind of more uncomfortable is that we kind of do it out of convenience for our own sake and not really to kind of Esther's point was saying is to meet them where they're at. And them, and I mean like other stakeholders. And that's like a big part of like being able to read what is the needs pretty much.
To add on to that, I mean, that I think goes into that conversation of invitations, right? Like we do it out of convenience for ourselves, which implies that we're not doing it because we genuinely care about it, because this is a thing that we have to do, right? So that brings up the question of like our parent meetings, invitations.
So what do you think an invitation to a student or a parent would look like?
Yeah, I actually saw a school. We went to go visit them, and the principals were saying that for their bank days, the teachers were all cohorted. But bank days, I believe, Tuesdays or whatever, they would start as a cohort. The teachers, they would call parents, and it was specifically for positive phone calls. So they would spend that whole hour, and then they would make a list of the students that they wanted to call, and then they would do it, pretty regularly. And so that's why there was so much parent involvement there. And I was just blown away. I was like, I don't understand why we're not doing this, or more schools aren't doing this. It seems so simple, but
people want to belong to stuff, belong to structures where they feel happy when they meet with them. You hear that your kid is doing good, or your kid did something wonderful, or that somebody likes your kid. That's so powerful.
Yeah.
Well, why don't we do that more often?
This brings up the even deeper conversation of what impact would that have in the household? Because a lot of times there is a clear connection between the students who get very little positive reinforcement at home and things like behavior, things like low performance on tests. And it's not because essentially the student wants to fail, because no student and no person in general actively seeks to fail. When we think about Maslow's hierarchy and we think about like what is even that sense of belonging, right? If we're really looking at like the physiological and then the safety, if that's as far as the child is going, then we shouldn't even be having conversations about why this child is failing tests. We should be having real conversations about why this child doesn't even feel like they belong. How much of an impact would being able to call home, but calling for the sake of just saying, hey, your child is great because of this reason, and not opening up that conversation in the household, I think that genuinely could change dynamics.
Even now, I think being in the middle of this COVID-19 pandemic, I think right now is the time which our teachers need to reach out to our parents more than ever to build those relationships, because we're talking about not seeing our students not having our students physically with us, and we have to build relationships with them. I think that we as teachers should be calling home to make sure that we are engaging all of our students, because I don't see how day one is going to look like. When day one comes, how many of our students are not going to be online?
I think we need to start with the data. So to send out a needs assessment to find out when it is that parents are able to meet and if they want to meet. I think we really need to start with the parents. And, there's multiple ways where we could send home those needs assessment depending on our population. Some people are attached to their cell phones and we could send home a Google form, via email if that's how they communicate. Others through text message. Others we could send home a paper. Others we could make a phone call, because each person's going to have a different method of how it is that they respond.
Essentially, the goal would be to meet parents where they're at, regardless of where they're at. This is one step, parent meetings. This is another step, Zoom meetings. This is another step, home visits. Whatever it is, and looking at it as we often don't in education, of whatever it takes.
Right. Bringing it back to that idea that we really need to be developing those relationships to create a collective we, right, so to speak. So that way we're not othering others, and then we're not, as a byproduct, othering ourselves.
Speak up.
Speak up.
Speak out.
Speak out.
Speak truth.
Speak truth.